Thank you so much, Professor Cheryl. I think the three words that are really sticking out to me after listening to everyone so far, and maybe they're words you can reflect on, is silence. So silence and leadership, as mentioned by Dr. Tim McDonald. And then being quiet. So I really loved how, Professor Cheryl, you were up here and you mentioned about being on stage with the girls and just being there quiet, but they know you're there. Even with Auntie Liz, she knew you were there. That's really powerful. And the other one is stillness. So making the space to be quiet, to listen and to really hear before you speak, before you ask. We're now going to have our fourth speaker. I'm going to present to you Dr. Paul Baker. Slight change to the program again, but we are being, we're just going with the program as is. Dr. Paul Baker is a developmental neuropsychologist who has worked with troubled children and youth, providing brain-based consultative services for over 20 years. Dr. Paul will introduce the PersonBrain Model, a framework promoting hope and opportunity drawing from neuroscience, psychology, ecological theory, and relational practice. Dr. Paul will lead us in a discussion outlining how our brain continually develops within the context of our relationships and environment. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Paul Baker.
So I first want to give an acknowledgement to the traditional owners of this land and the elders past, present, and emerging. When I'm able to tell people, and I'm going to do things a little differently, I'm going to walk around. Maybe not. I'll walk over here, try that. I want us to be able to have really good engagement, because one of the things I'm going to be sharing with you is my set of experiences that are going to come from a variety of different interactions that I've had over my past in working with troubled children and youth, and also the people that have come with them. You see, my history is a little bit different because I've been involved for over 20 years in the Sorry? This is on, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, thanks. You just want to make sure I'm heard, Jan. That's what I love about you. So I want to share with you the experiences that have culminated both in my career and my personal life. And I'll probably be drawing a lot on my personal life more than you might think. Because during my experience, I ran schools in the state of Georgia back in the United States that dealt with individuals with severe emotion and behavior disorders. You see, in the state where I come from, we had very little residential resources for children. And so, in fact, schools were given the charge to be able to deal with the emotion and behavioral challenges. And in fact, they equipped the schools with clinical work and clinical professionals to be able to work side by side with the educators. So it afforded me the opportunity to be exposed to a number of individuals who experienced what we now call trauma. But for the past few years, we just have known to be challenging or troubling behavior. You see, I've been around long enough to see the decades of us having different themes and different topics. And as you know, you sit here today and we raise the topic of trauma. But I also remember in the 80s us raising the topic of attachment. And I remember us raising the topic of resilience. And I remember us raising the topic of being brain-based. And now we raise the topic of trauma. Now I say this to you because I think every single time that we have raised a topic, we have gained an amazing amount of knowledge that then we have embedded in our general practice. And as a result of that, it becomes part of our tale of our practices that we put into place. So soon, the trauma-informed care practices will become embedded in most everything that we do if we do this well. But if we don't do it well, then we're going to run into some challenges. where these things may not be practiced in a place where kids will actually come out on top. You see, my work in education has been important, but the most powerful experiences that I had were the experiences that I gained from being a foster parent. You see, I became a foster parent, and during my fostering time, I had over 29 different foster children that came through my house, of which 4 of those particular foster children were adopted and my adoptive sons at this point in life. I'm a very proud father, by the way, and I may throw up a picture of them in just a few minutes. You see, all of these kids that came through my house were what we called level 5. They didn't have a place to go other than to group home facilities, and our group home facilities are not really a good place to be. And in fact, people were given threats that if you don't shape up or you don't do what you're supposed to do, guess what they told them they were going to have to go to? The group home facility. And so every child walked in saying, I hope I can make it here and I don't have to go to the group home. And no one really knew what the group home looked like. They just knew that it wasn't a place they wanted to be. But because of that, these experiences taught me that not only did I have a 9-to-5 job, that really was never a 9-to-5 job, working in the clinical schools, but I also had a job that I came home to that was much different than the experiences that I had had when I was raised in my family. You see, I started to see kids that would come home and that they didn't want to talk. And I would ask simple questions like, how was school? And that was enough to cause them to potentially punch a window out in my house. I might ask them, what do you want for dinner? And they would look at me and say, none of your effing shit. Your food sucks. And I would say, wow, I just put a whole bunch of time into preparing this food. How can you say that about my food? Mama Baker and Grandma Baker have passed these traditions down to me for years, so you must want to eat my food. You see, my whole lifestyle changed because the way that I started to interact on a daily basis had to change. I had to start to see things from a different perspective. As a neuropsychologist, I was always trained that my job was to come in to assess. And in most cases, when people came to me, the first thing that they wanted from me was a diagnosis. And in many cases, if they left with a diagnosis, they were satisfied with what I gave them. But you know who wasn't satisfied with what I gave them was me. Because they would come in and many times they would say, I want to know what's wrong with me. I want to know what's wrong with my child. And as a result, we would do our battery of assessments. I would do my interviews. And they would leave with some type of diagnosis. So potentially it could be that they had bipolar disorder, major depression, ADHD, maybe even on the autism spectrum. But here's what I found. That most of the time that people would take my reports, they would take them back to the school and people would turn to the one page that they needed in order to receive funding. Or the one page that they needed to do to be able to say, see, I told you so, I knew they were autistic. And what was not happening was that they were not taking the opportunity to read the recommendations. And then I started asking questions of people, why is it that you don't go to the recommendations pages? And the more people that I talked about to, the school teachers, the foster cares, the people who are truly on the front lines, the youth workers, they would say, because we don't understand what you're talking about. We don't understand what you mean by some of these recommendations. Now, fortunately, this was fairly early in my career, and I was very confused because I had been doing what people taught me to do in school. I was writing my recommendations like a good neuropsychologist would. But what was not being translated was what we actually needed to happen on the front line. And so I started to think about what is it that comprehensively that our kids were really needing. How could we take a deficit-based level of thinking from someone who says that they have depression or bipolar or any of the other types of things that might label them as being a particular way, into looking at them from a perspective that I myself and the current organization that I work with right now, Lambie Care in Newcastle, sees things as being a needs-based type of framework. How can we actually look at our practice if we are truly going to be trauma-informed, then we have to look at how our practices will translate on the front line. Not in what we can say we look like, that we sound like, what we can put in a brochure for people to read about us, or even what we might be able to get up here and to say. What we will really be judged by is what we do on the front line when we are working with a child face to face and the practices that will be imparted. That's what will make us trauma-informed practitioners. So those of you who have adopted attachment-informed practices or resilience-informed practices have embedded them into what you do on a daily basis. You see, this merger of what we know about brain science can be very helpful to us. It can be helpful in the sense that we can learn some practical ways to make the what and how we do things much more efficient. Because many times when we do not understand various brain systems that we are working with, we'll often choose the wrong strategies. And we find ourselves saying, I've been doing this and doing this and doing this, and it's just not working. But when we fully engage and start to look at the pasts of the clients that we're working with, or the foster children, or the students that we engage with, we realize that they tend to be operating in certain brain systems most of the time. And we often then find out that some of the therapies and the interventions and the supports that we're actually putting into place are not compatible with the brain systems that they're actually working in. So I want to offer, and I see some amazing themes that are running through what we're talking today, but in the PersonBrain model we have 4 areas that we feel are extremely important for people to be able to understand as being essential. First and foremost, you would have heard Howard give us a great introduction to the component of what it means to have safety, or the concept of perceived safety. You see, we know it's extremely important for people to be able to perceive that they are safe in a variety of ways. Now, if I just ask you right now, can you tell me a variety of ways that people might feel safe? You might say, oh, there's some emotional safety, there's psychological safety, there's physical safety. The list could go on and on. But the importance of how someone perceives themselves in any particular moment becomes of extreme importance. Because there's something that happens biologically inside of our brains that will set the tone on whether we are going to exist and thrive well in a particular setting or not. If at any moment in time a person perceives that they are not safe in any area that I said, emotional or physical or psychological or even environmental, ecological safety, there will be certain parts of the brain that will actually shut down or become hyper-aroused and ultra-sensitive in an effort to protect that person in order to help them to survive. You see, our brains are first and foremost survival brains. If you're able to take a peek into looking at a baby in the womb in the 6th week of gestation, you would actually see that the survival brain is so significant that we actually are sending blood flow to this area of the brain at just 6 weeks old. These are areas of the brain that sometimes we're not able to think about. In fact, I want to tell you now that we never, ever think about anything that comes out of the survival brain. Survival brain behaviors are actually called survival reactions. And these are things that happen in response to the environment. And they are given to us by our ancestors, and they're given to us by our current and past experiences since we've taken our first breath of life. You see, our ancestors passed down some bits and pieces that have been embedded into the survival brain so that if we pick up on bits and pieces out there in the world, then we start to realize that that's a threat to us. And we start to do things like fighting, fleeing, or freezing. And we've all heard those terms most of the times. We can say fight, flight, or freeze. And you see, it's these behaviors that help us to become safer in our environments, to keep us to be able to move throughout our environments and to react appropriately. Unfortunately, what happens in many of our kids' cases is that if they are under constant threats for safety, this particular area of the brain stays hyper-aroused and remains hyper-aroused for a long time. You see, I've learned this very carefully and clearly with some of my foster kids and most importantly, the toughest one that I had seen was my youngest son, adopted son, James, who's now 21, and also has the opportunity to experience his life as a young man with autism. Asperger's, or high-functioning autism, as we now call it. You see, let me go back on that, sorry, it flipped forward. You see, James not only was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, James had a very significant past in which he was extremely subjected to abuse, both physical and emotional, and we are perceiving at this point and conceiving that he probably was sexually abused as well. You see, when James first came to me when he was 6 years old, his amygdala, his survival brain, was so hyper-aroused that anything that you said or did at a high tone of voice was enough to send him into a tantrum. I remember times of just walking down the hallway and coming too quickly around the corner and him dropping to the ground, screaming at the top of his lungs, "Why did you come around the corner so fast?" And then all of a sudden I look at him and said, "James, I'm just coming around the corner. What happened?" And he would shoot up and run out of the house, and then I'd have a 6-year-old running down the street. There would be times when I would be unloading the dishwasher, and I would taking the cutlery out of the dishwasher, and accidentally I dropped it on the ground. And that was simply enough to trigger a memory of him that when he was younger, his mom and dad used to throw the cutlery at each other in the kitchen enough times that he had remembered that the sound of cutlery equaled potential danger. You see, these are the things I wasn't prepared for. These are the things that didn't really matter whether someone had a bipolar diagnosis, even a diagnosis of autism, or major depression or anxiety. What it did tell me that I needed to be able to know about his experiences. And his experiences became the most important thing. And so as I start to talk about this, you're going to see that I'm going to have themes of safety. I'm going to have themes of significance. And I'm going to have themes of respectfulness and also the connectedness or relatedness that will be very important. You see, we are the result of our experiences, both good and bad. I give you the task now to be thinking about one of the toughest kids that you've ever come across before. And I want you just to be thinking and grab maybe the first 3 years of their life. And I want you to be thinking about the experiences that that child had. And I'll give you a way to work with that in a way that we work in the PersonBrain Model. And those of you in this room, and I know a number of you have had the training, you will know that I repeat over and over again. What are the sights, the sounds, the tastes, and the touches that those children were experiencing up to that point of life? What was it like to be held, to be hit? What did it smell like in the house? In the United States, we have a major epidemic, and I know that it's an epidemic issue here in many cases, of using meth or ice. I've had children that have told me, "Your house smells weird." And I'll say, "Tell me about that," because I wanted to know whether my house smelled really weird or not. But one of the kids actually said, he goes, "It doesn't smell like my house." And I said, "Oh, really?" He goes, "Yeah, but you know, my mom and dad used to make meth in the garage." And I said, "That's a good thing. I'm glad that my house doesn't smell that way." But I started to realize these particular cases, that these kids were coming from experiences that were so different than mine. And that I needed to be able to understand their experiences, both their good experiences and their bad experiences, before I could actually really get down to the root of what I could do to help them. Second, we have to realize that people are the primary element in relational change. And have a statement: people change people, theories don't change people. People are consistently asking me, "Do you think I should use dialectical behavior therapy? Do you think I should use ACT? What therapy do you think is best for trauma-informed care?" And I would say people. And they would say, "No, I need to send my staff. I've got $10,000 I need to spend, and I need to get them somewhere." And I would say, "That's okay. You need people." Throughout this morning, we have heard the power of relationships. And in relational theory and even in neuroscience, we know that if first and foremost we are not grounded in safe, significant, respectful relationships, we will go nowhere with children. It won't matter whether you have dialectical behavior therapy advanced level 4 years under your belt. It will matter that you will be able to sit and connect with that individual to push forward whatever experiences that need to be reimbursed, and we will talk about that in a minute, in order to help them to thrive. We also know that we can't give you a book big enough that can help you to be able to turn to page 74 during an emotional or behavioral crisis. That's just not going to happen. But here's what we do know. If we provide people with enough knowledge about how the brain works and the power of relationship, they'll have immediate tools that they can use to see at that moment, I wonder if I'm working with the right brain system. I wonder if I'm considering the past of this individual. How can I make a good decision in the moment? We also know that relationships and ecological factors, or what we mean that people and environments, are extremely important, and they create states and traits in us. I'm going to give you an example of this. My son Robert, when he came to me at the age of 14, had been in foster care for 18 months. And in those 18 months, Robert had experienced 14 foster placements. And I want to walk you through that a second. Because anytime Robert heard the word foster care, foster home, foster mom, or foster dad, he had 14 different examples of what that meant. But he also had 14 different examples of it breaking down. You see, Robert was hanging out with some other foster kids at the Department of Family and Children's Services one afternoon. He was waiting for his mom and dad, biological mom and dad, to come and have their visit. You see, he ran across another guy named Damien. And Damien was well known in the foster care world as a foster child because he had been kicked out of the most placements in our county. And so Robert was listening to him, and he said, and Damien told him, you know, this county only has 72 foster homes. If you go through all of the foster homes, by law, they have to return you to your family. Well, Damien was his own best lawyer, by the way. I just want to let you know, and didn't know the law very well. But Robert, in his particular wisdom at his developmental age, said, wow, I've already been through 14. I don't have long to go. So in his mind, he was thinking that every single placement was an opportunity to challenge that placement and get kicked out, and a closer to his step was to being home. Well, Robert entered our house, and I come back to the fact that it creates states in your brain and in your body. Robert had walked up to someone's front door in their home, and 14 times they had said, welcome to your new foster home. If I were just to count slowly up to 14, you guys would probably tell me I get the picture, and it would start to get irritating. But 14 times a foster mom or a foster dad introduced themselves to him. 14 times he was walked to the back of the house, or to the top of the house, or to the side of the house, and introduced to his bedroom. You see, every single time he went through those experiences, it reminded him of the past. Robert's situation was a little bit different because we found ourselves 6 months later driving in the car together. And it suddenly dawned on me that Robert was still there. He hadn't gone yet. And so this wasn't going to be another placement. And so as I was driving along the car, I stopped and I thought, I'm going to ask him why he's still here, because I really wanted to know. And so I asked the question, I said, Robert, and at this point he was calling me Dad. He said, yeah, Dad? And I said, I got a question for you, and I don't want you to take this the wrong way. And I said, I really don't want you to take this the wrong way. And I said, but I'm kind of just curious, what's making you stick around? Because you were really good at getting yourself removed from other homes. And he's like, Dad, I don't know. I really don't know what it is. And I said, well, if you give some thought to that, that might be helpful. I said, I wonder if what you have done and your experience might be helpful to some other foster kids. So he's like, I don't know. I mean, I'll think about it. So it was a few minutes later, Robert said, I think I know what it was, Dad. And I said, what was it? And he said, you remember when I first came into the house? And I said, yeah. And he goes, you know what you did that no one else ever did? I said, no, this is why I'm trying to ask from you. And he said, you actually asked me to put my clothes away. And I said, what? And he goes, do you realize that in every single placement that I'd had before, I'd never been asked to put my clothes away? And I thought that was just, that couldn't be true because I'm a neuropsychologist. I had to have been imparting some kind of a magical theory on him. And so I asked him again, I said, and what else happened? And he goes, no, Dad, that was it. And I said, wow, all of those schooling years and all that money, I just need to have people put their clothes away. And so he goes, no, Dad, you don't understand. He goes, I actually thought that when you asked me to put my clothes away that I might have a chance in staying here because every other time I had walked in, I didn't think they were expecting me to stay. And I said, that's really interesting. And it started to resonate with me. And so all of my experience and all of my schooling started to culminate, and I started to realize something. It was by asking him to put his clothes away, a very important thing that happens even in neuroscientific terms, Robert was provided with something called hope. And you see, hope is an extremely important thing because it produces an important chemical known as dopamine. And dopamine encourages us to do more of things. It's a reward hormone, a reward neurotransmitter. And here's what's great about hope. Hope then spawns motivation. And then from that, with even more dopamine production and more reward, motivation spawns transformation. You see, I started to realize that we had science on our side. And no longer could we ever say that we had children that had no hope. Because science actually told us that they did. No longer could we say that there's nothing more that we can do for a child because we now have science that says, yes, there is. We know that the brain is structured and designed to be able to change from the first breath of life to the last breath of life. And we know this through concepts of neuroplasticity. We know this that even down to our genetic structure, what happens to us that we are no longer destined to be what our DNA has brought us forth to be. We can actually change things in real time. This means that the experiences that we create with the young people that are interacting with us, the way that we talk to them, the way that we make them feel, the experiences that we create in conjunction with them can actually help to turn particular components of their genetic code off and or on. So we are never enslaved by our genetic history. And see, for years, science has taught us that we were. And so now, when people come to us, we now say, we cannot say to people they have no hope, because science says that we absolutely can. And I also knew that something else was important. With all of the experience that I'd had and the learning that I had accomplished over the years, I realized that everyone that was involved in the work with children had the ability to be what we will call a therapeutic helper. And therapeutic helpers are those people who help us to engage in the process of transformation. And transformation, I'll share with you in a few minutes, occurs in the context of what we will call reimbursements, with the ultimate goal of leading to resilience. You see, I loved hearing earlier about the idea that cultural awareness and cultural responsiveness just cannot be talked about. It has to be lived. The same thing happens with social skills. I hear people will say, oh, we're teaching social skills this morning for 50 minutes. And I say, I hope you teach it throughout the day. In the United States, it was a huge initiative about 5 years ago to bring character education to the schools. So people imparted character education curriculum in which they taught character for 50 minutes a day. And then you got another 50 minutes of social skills, as if social skills and character were limited to 50 minutes a day. Now, don't get me wrong, I know we have to teach people skills. That's not what I'm saying. But it really begins from the moment that we enter a door into the minute we leave a door. All of these things are about how we help our children transform into being resilient. You see, if I ask most of you, how would you define resilience? I would say that the majority of you would say it's about bouncing back. But for many of our kids, they don't have anything to bounce back to. And so what we have to do is to be able to provide them with transformation. And so I'm going to bring forth a topic. We asked the question about what makes things therapeutic. In the PersonBrain Model, we like to simplify things. We like to bring it to the front line and make it workable. In our definition, anything that changes the brain for the better is considered to be therapeutic. That means that the students in my classroom can be therapeutic to a child. The other foster children in my home were probably the most therapeutic engagers of anyone. I didn't have to take someone for an hour of therapy and expect that in an hour of therapy, their life would be changed. Or that the reimbursements across all of their life would be provided to them. Was it an essential piece? Yes, it was, but it wasn't the only piece. And so as a result, the concept emerged in the PersonBrain Model known as the reimbursement process. And bear with me as I try to explain this to you in simple terms in our limited time. But if you take a look at a normal person's course of development, if I were to ask you, tell me what you think that an average 3-year-old has experienced in their life right now. And you might say, well, what does average mean? Well, trust me, we know when it's not because we're working with a lot of those people every day. And so I want you to think about what would have been expected. Who would be the people in their lives? What would they do on a day-to-day basis? What would they do on a weekly basis? And if they hadn't done that, you would be kind of thinking, that's unfortunate, or that's sad, maybe. Then I want you to ask the same question about what would you expect a typical 7-year-old to have experienced? Who would be in their lives? What quality of relationships? What would be the experiences that they would be participating in every day? You see, reimbursements are actually providing the young people that we are working with the things that they typically should have received in the first place, should they have been growing up in healthy, typical developing environments. And see, it is these particular elements that we propose in our model that are essential in the frontline work. You see, because this doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter whether you have depression or whether you have anxiety issues or whether you are an individual with autism. What matters is what you need. And we need to be able to turn this to a focus that we can prescriptively say, I want to look at what you need in a comprehensive basis. And we want to take the look at what you need and actually put plans into place. And these are plans that are not clinical necessarily, but it could involve some clinical things. And so let's look at these 6 particular areas of reimbursement that we consider to be essential in the person brain. First and foremost, we believe that it is very important that we look at the relational components of people to find out who has been in their life. Who are the people that have been in their life that have been both positive and negative? And we need to tap into the strengths of the individuals that have been positive. How does that young person describe the people in their lives that have been good influences on them? What were the characteristics of those individuals? Because what we need to know is what those characteristics are so that we can go find more people like that that will increase the likelihood that they will have a good mentor in their life. But we also need to know what their gaps are. Native American culture has a very well-known saying in the U.S. And it's not the typical saying where you hear that it takes a village to raise a child, but it's another supplement that it takes multiple mothers and multiple fathers to raise children. Many of you may have remembered when you were growing up in life that you would play in your neighborhood and there would be multiple mothers who were watching after you. If you had done something, they might shout out the door, hey, 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 get out of the rose bushes. Come out of the street. And so multiple mothers and multiple fathers existed in our daily routine. We need to be looking back and putting plans into place on the front line, because if we don't fulfill them with appropriate positive relationships and reimburse them in the moment, putting other plans into place are going to be very difficult. Now we move down a little bit here, and again we're moving very quickly, but we start to look at experiential aspects. Now this is one that kind of shocks people sometimes, because experiences are extremely important to us. One of my colleagues tells a story of when they were working with a child who was preparing to leave care. They were saying, okay, well, it looks like you're doing a good job with your medication management. Oh, you're doing a pretty good job in school. Looks like you know exactly how to access some independent living, and all that stuff is happening. So it looks like we're pretty much set to go. Is there anything you really want to tell us? And he tells a story of this young man looking at him and saying, yeah, you know what? You know how you can really help me? Is you can help me find a friend. And he said, because I got all the other shit taken care of. He goes, but I don't know how to make a friend. And here's the problem. He goes, every single Wednesday, I can tell you, I sit in school, and I hear everyone talking about the weekend. And you know what? I don't have anything to talk about. And then I know on the weekend that people are doing things. They're doing things that I want to do. And then on Monday, you know what I have to listen to? People telling me about their weekend and what they did. He goes, if you really want to help me find a friend. And then he said, you know, I've never even been asked to spend the night at someone's house, so I don't even know what that's like. Those are the types of things that when you start to ask from the youth voice perspective, what do you need? How can we help you? We start to see things differently than just making things clinical. I will tell you right now that many of the foster children that I had come into my house, they didn't have a lot of experiences going to grocery stores. They didn't have experiences going to restaurants where someone came up to you and asked you, what would you like to eat? May I please take your order? Because they didn't eat in those types of places. You know how I learned these situations? By taking them to restaurants or to supermarkets and realizing that they didn't have supermarket experience behavior. And if you don't think there is something like that, I am here to tell you that there is. You see, I started to realize I was missing the mark, and I was making things too clinical when things needed to be more practical. I knew that they needed to be able to go every single Sunday and go to the Baker family cookout that happened after church. Now, they didn't have to go to church with us if they didn't want to, but everyone gathered. All 50 plus of us gathered at my grandparents' house. And we had fun. But here's what I didn't expect when I first started bringing my foster children there, is that people would come up and do nice things like ask them, so where are you from? Where are your mom and dad? Do you have any brothers and sisters? But guess what? I quickly learned that those are questions that get asked. And that there are behaviors that were quite shocking to some of my family members that followed. Things like, what the hell's wrong? What's going on with that kid? Or even the statement, I don't know how you do it. And I would look at them and I would realize I failed this child in this moment. Because what I should have been doing was thinking about all of these experiences and do they have the skills, and if not, how can I help them get them? Because you see what? I see what happens. I remember going to foster care meetings where my peers would be talking about, I can't go to the grocery store, I can't go out to dinner, we can't go to my family's house, this placement's going to break down. And then what would happen is that they would throw more services at it, more medicine, more clinical work, when the bottom line was we need to be practicing in experiences. We need to be looking at how we can reimburse. Third, ecocultural reimbursement. This is a very important thing because all of our kids come from a variety of ecologies that are more than likely very foreign to us. And all of them come from a different culture than ours. Culture is a much broader term than we think. It's about the ceremonies. It's about the rituals. It's about the traditions that families and groupings have together that become important to a person. Think about yourself, your favorite foods. Think about moments that you like to recreate for yourself. When you're feeling sad or happy, what do? Those are your ceremonies, your traditions, your rituals. If those were stripped of you, and you were then told that you need to come and live in one of our finest foster homes, these are wonderful people. You're going to love living there. But here's the deal. You're going to need to conform to their culture. You would struggle. Even if I looked like you, sounded like you, and did things similar to you, we would be different. And so if I came from the perspective as a foster parent that you were going to adhere to my culture, we would run into some serious problems. So it became simple things that I started to realize were important, whether I was consulting with residential treatment care, whether I was consulting in juvenile justice, foster parents, or schools. I always asked the question, have you asked about cultural importance to this child? And there was a series of 20 questions that we could use to help prompt them along the way. Simple things like, what is your favorite food and why is that important to you? Why would that question be vital? Because it gives us a history, a tale of what the connection is. You see, it's about asking pieces and giving the youth a voice in what's happening to them. Regulatory reimbursement. One of the number one reasons in school that people are referred for disciplinary action is their inability to control their emotions and/or behavior. Now, this is where you might be able to tie some things in clinically, be able to connect them clinically, to be able to teach them how to self-manage, or the huge word right now is self-regulate. How many people have heard that word recently? It's self-regulate. So these are the points here where you might be able to tie it in. And then finally, next is biological reimbursement. This is where we scan the child's life and we look at the various things that are related to biological success. And we look at what it is that they might be missing. You know, in 2016, the American Pediatric Association declared the lack of sleep an epidemic problem for U.S. teenagers. You know the number one interference of sleep for U.S. teenagers? Probably the same in Australia. Guess what it is? Technology. Do you know in a portion of their study when they had inquired further, to a follow-up study, they had asked why people were having interrupted sleep? Do you know that 125, and I can't recall exactly the total number, reported that they were waking up 4 or more times a night to check social media in order to make sure that people weren't saying anything about them or their friends. Now I want you to think about that for a second, because for many years we've known that going to high school and being in school is quite stressful. But most people were able to leave the school behind. But now what's happening is that you even go to sleep with a different anxiety that is occurring. We also know that the poor nutrition components of a client or a child coming into our care is also something. Poor exercise that we need to be able to get under control. Most of the children that came into my care had very, very different nutritional habits. I'm not saying I had the best nutritional habits, but I'm saying they had very different ones. When my family usually started on the periphery of the supermarket, they went straight to the middle. What do you find in the middle more often? Your processed foods, rather than the different foods. It might be a little bit more helpful to you. And finally, academic reimbursement. We know from the studies that we have in the U.S. that if people are not able to read, write, and do mathematics at a year 5 level, they do not possess the skills to navigate typical life. Meaning they cannot read the contracts that will be provided to them comprehensively and understand what they mean. We also know that they won't be able to do the mathematics to maintain a normal budget inside of their household. And these are extremely important things as they put children at tremendous risk. When we talk about in the person brain and when we are looking at people neurorelationally, we are asking ourselves, what are the frontline things that we need to be doing in order to help a child through non-clinical ways? These are the practical ways that we can do things. How can we schedule a week to look in order to meet the needs that someone might have. And here's the danger, is not scheduling that week. Not taking a look at the reimbursements. Not considering the ways that we might be able to support them. If we don't do that, we don't bring in those practices of attachment, of resilience, and of trauma. We need to be able to pull those things together. So, what I would like to do is to go, sorry about this, I know we're running a little bit different on time. Can we play the video? Because I want us to be able to take a look. I'm going to set it up just a second. How many of you are familiar with the movie 8 Mile? Okay, so a few of you are. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the video itself. In this particular video clip, we have the story of Eminem, who is a very popular rap artist now. He's been popular now for 15 years. It just doesn't seem like it's been that long for me. But Eminem is portrayed in a fairly true account in this particular story about his struggle growing up in an area of Detroit known as 8 Mile. And it's literally an area of Detroit that is extremely impoverished, it's extremely dangerous, and most people are trying to get out of it. He's not real talented in the things that his peers tell him it will take to get out of the environment. He believes that he's got to play basketball or he's got to be able to be a rap star in order to get out. But he's not real good at either one of them right now, but he is really good at writing poetry. And so he's had a teacher that's told him he should try to turn his poetry into rap music. And so he does, and he starts to have a whole bunch of competitions, and he becomes good. I love this particular video sequence because in this video sequence, it's such an accurate portrayal of many of the places where our kids come from. The children that we have to look at on a daily basis to be able to say, how can we help you? What are the things that we can do to take the details and make them come alive? In this particular video sequence, I want you to be thinking, as you're watching, about this little girl that you're going to see interacting in her environment. Who are the people that she relates to on a daily basis? What are her experiences like on a typical day? What are the things that she's done to learn how to regulate herself? All of these things that are starting to create who she is and how she behaves in her environment and or reacts to the people and the things around her. And then we might even have some discussion on what type of reimbursements might she need if she were taken out of this house today and put into care. How might we support her? Okay.
Palms are sweaty. Sweater already. Mom's spaghetti. He's nervous. Keeps on forgetting what he wrote down. He opens his mouth. Words won't come out. Clocks run out. You only get one shot. Opportunity, lifetime. Lose yourself. You only get one shot. Opportunity, lifetime.
You know your mom's getting evicted? It says right here, tenant must vacate the premises due to non-payment of rent. You know about this?
Morning. Sweetie,
Hey
you want
there.
some cereal?
I was just talking to your precious son about this eviction situation. You planning on telling me about this, huh?
Oh, honey, that was just a mistake.
You fucking liar.
Hey, man.
Stay out of this, Rabbit. It's okay. Don't worry. I'm taking care of it.
Don't.
Man! Fuck is your problem? You don't touch my mother, man!
No, stay out of it. Stay out of it.
I'm out of here. I can't go out with someone like you.
Are you gonna let him just talk to you like this?
Just
Two
don't-
homeless
don't let it
kids.
stop. Jimmy, please! Stop it! Stop it! Stop!
Fuck you! Fuck you!
Stop it! Stop it!
Oh my God. Lily. Come here, baby. Come here. It's okay. Come here, baby. Come here. It's okay. It's okay. It's over. It's over.
So I leave you with this question. If Lily were to come into your care today, and she were to be removed from her home in 1 hour, how would your agency, your organization, your school be prepared to handle her by providing her with the reimbursements she needs? How will you find the men, the women, the other people, the peers that can help to transform her life so that she can become more resilient? What experiences can you do in your capacity to change her life so that she realizes that there are multiple ways to be families and that this isn't the only way? How can you expose her to different environments and experiences? And going down the list of the reimbursements, how might you use that as a pathway for planning? Take today's information, the stuff that you hear this morning, the stuff that you hear this afternoon, and funnel it through a thinking process that can help you take information not just from being bits and pieces that you have heard in training and keeping it from being a drive-by training and keeping it into a training that actually produces results. We encourage you to look at planning, and we encourage you to stay active in our conversations today. I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you, and I believe we're going to lunch now. Is that right? All right. Thank you.